Hey everyone, I wanted to do a little recap each week of the study in case you missed it. I'm just going to talk about Philippians and what we're covering each week, and particularly with Philippians 1 through 18. Paul the Apostle is in prison in Rome, and he's writing to a church who has supported him financially through a lot of difficulties at different times in his work as a preacher. And this is essentially a thank you letter to them. However, he hasn't seen them in a really long time. And so they're awaiting to hear from him. And I want you to notice the first words that he really has in this letter after his introduction of who he is in chapter 1 and verse 3, which he says, "I thank my God upon every remembrance of you." So instead of all of the circumstances that he's going through and what he could update them on, he wants to first let them know that he's praying for them. He has been fully supported by them, and he loves this church. You can see that in verse 8. "For God is my witness, how greatly I long for you all with the affection of Jesus Christ." But what's first on his heart is praying for them, praying that they would stand firm in the day of Christ, that they would be faithful to the end. When you look at verse 9, "And this I pray, that your love may abound still more and more in knowledge and all discernment, that you may approve the things that are excellent, that you may be sincere and without offense till the day of Christ, being filled with the fruits of righteousness which are by Jesus Christ, to the glory and praise of God." Now, he is writing essentially that they would become more and more dedicated to the Lord's work in their lives, and not for their own glory, but particularly in verse 11, to the glory and praise of God. Now, after his introduction remarks, that's not super uncommon for Paul to say, "I'm praying for you." He does that a lot. But after his intro, you would think he would update them about himself and his situation. And in verse 12, he says, "But I want you to know, brethren, that the things which happened to me have actually turned out for the furtherance of the gospel," which this is kind of a record scratch. This is not something that you would expect to come out of his mouth. I would expect actually the things that have happened to me have turned out to be really hard, to be challenging. I'm Paul the Apostle. I am out and I am trying to spread the gospel, and I'm in jail, and I cannot do what I used to do. But he says, actually, it's turned out for the furtherance of the gospel. And so if you wanted to mark down a key theme in the book of Philippians, it's oftentimes called the book of joy. Joy is used in a 13 times in joy or rejoice. But here is another huge theme, in that the things that are happening in front of our eyes are not necessarily the things that are happening spiritually. And so in verse 13, it's become evident to the whole palace guard and to all the rest that my chains are in Christ. And so he is talking with guards next to him in the jail about Jesus, and they're able to hear about Jesus chained next to him. And what you would think would be a deterrent for any Christian around to hear about someone being put in jail for their faith. In verse 14, "Most of the brethren in the Lord, having become more confident by my chains, are much more bold to speak the word without fear." And so you have this fire, this passion for Jesus is spreading in the face of persecution, in the face of what you would think would be a retardant to the faith, but it's actually moving it forward. And then Paul goes into this situation where he's not liked by everybody. And so some people are preaching because they want to love the Lord. They want to help other people. Other people are preaching with poor motives. They kind of want to downgrade Paul in some way. And he just says, you know what? In verse 18, what then? Only that in every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is preached. And so the actually moment there is, okay, you might have some poor motives, but what is actually going on is Jesus is still being preached, and I can rejoice in that. And he says, and I will rejoice in that. So one of the big things that we learn from Paul is to think beyond the temporary. Think beyond what is happening in front of us. If we want to have true joy, we must push past the things that are happening. He says in another place in 2 Corinthians 5 that we regard no one according to the flesh. We don't see people anymore according to the outward appearance, but we look past that and we see what's happening spiritually. And I think that's what we see Paul doing and living in Philippians here. The encouragement for us tonight is to be more and more devoted into the day of Christ in verse 9, 10, and 11, and also to look beyond the temporary to the eternal. I hope that's a blessing to you, and I hope that we can see you next Monday night. Thanks so much.